So, guys, I have a particular honor right now. It's always an honor for me to introduce another woman fisherman. And Laura Messersmith-Glavin is a particular privilege, I feel, and I'm so excited for you all. If you haven't heard her work before, you're in for a treat. So, Laura grew up fishing out of Kodiak, and she's a writer and a teacher in Portland, Oregon. First time I heard her read was last year at the Sunday open mic, and I stood in the back weeping. So I think I chased her down in the bathroom to find out who she was. So please, Laura Messersmith-Glavin. Short people, Jesus Christ. This is really the best we can do. Do you remember what I said about the light? Hello. Hi. All right. Excellent. Thank you very much. That was really sweet, Dylan. Thank you. It's always great to be here. This is my 5th Fisher Poets, and this is my first with my family here. So my parents, Jen and Stephanie. So there will be no weeping tonight. I saved my tearjerker for Friday, so this is a little more frivolous. So yeah, I grew up fishing. I was 2 years old when I first went on the boat, and then I retired at the ripe old age of 21, which means it's now actually been 17 years since I went fishing, which feels like a really, really long time, but what that really makes stand out for me is how much it continues to still shape who I am. And one of the ways that's most salient to me is I have this tremendous skill set that is totally unused, right? Like, I am the shit at mending gear. And I find that doesn't come up much when I'm teaching developmental education, right? And so this is just I want to do 2 pieces. The first one is really short, but it's just about thinking of what are the skills that I have that I can't really apply any longer. This is called How to Kill Things. So, jellyfish, they're evil. Stomp them, shred them, kick them through the scuppers. King crab, dump them live in hot, boiling water. That's not screaming. It's hot air escaping the carapace. I promise. Deer, lie in wait in the early morning. Wet grass, quiet, soft, munching sounds. Wait and wait and wait until your body is stiff and tingling, and then it sears with pain, and finally it disappears altogether. Now, fire. Gut, smell blood steaming in the morning, hang, skin, shh, don't tell fish and game. Bullhead, ugh, throw it overboard. All right, seagull, some feed them Alka-Seltzer. Mosquito, any means possible. Smack, crush, poison, wave frantically, plead, beg, threaten, resign. Kodiak grizzly bear. You gotta be kidding, no, we don't kill bears. Sea lion. Yeah, we don't kill those either. You can't even swear at them, as a matter of fact. Puffin, shoot, retrieve, gut, let dry and stiffen, and sit on your mantle for decades because you can't remember the number of your taxidermist. My parents know what we're talking about. Salmon, round them up, pull them out, suffocate them, say thank you. Whale, never, never, never kill a whale. However, we watched one die once. It beached itself and then rotted on the shore for a summer. Its bones slowly peeling free of its thick hide, and its blubber melting down in the cold sun. And the sand fleas made quick work of the rest, and my dad towed a jawbone off the beach and hauled it on deck and took it south, heaved it on a truck, and dragged it home. It was beautiful. And that bone sat in our yard for 5 years before the FBI came to take it away. They had Polaroids of the entire process. Memories. As I've cast back and taken each story from the flood of the life that surrounded it, I have felt it wriggle and die beneath my pen, as surely as if I had stabbed it and pinned it to a velvet cloth for others to look at in passing. Each story in my collection is as close to the living of it as a dead bug in a display case is to the wild flight path the living wings once carved through space. Every time we tell a story, it pulls life away from its origin and breathes it into its own golem body, animating something that once was inanimate. The story changes, dies, and is reborn to fit the mood of the crowd or the moment of the telling. Memory becomes fiction, becomes myth. Thank you. So that's kind of what I love about Fisher Poets, is we get to tell these stories and nobody knows what's true or not anymore. And there's all these, there's the skippers, like, the glory of the sea, and then there's the deckhands going, fishing fucking sucks, and then there's like the men talking about it one way, and the women have this very other thing that happens, and so it's, there's room for all of that. And I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful for Mo Bouster, and I just want to give her a quick shout out, because she's the person who first said, hey Lara, you gotta get on stage, you gotta start telling some of these stories, And so this next piece that I want to do is actually one that I wrote this last fall for an event that she put together in Portland. I think Tella was there, and Rob Seitz was on stage for a bit, and Clem Stark was there, and Mo, and anyway, it was called Tough Guys Read Poetry. And so I got to think about that a little bit. I'm not really a poet. I'm not really a tough guy, but it made me think, what the hell is that? What's a tough guy? So this poem is called Tough Guy. I want to tell you something about tough. My mama worked in the jail. My daddy ran the beach gang. They met in a bar made out of a ship in a town called Kodiak, where the bears are big and the bugs are bigger and the drunks stumble onto your boat and puke in your bunk. It was the beachcombers, for those of you who know what I'm talking about, the old one. My dad waited for the drunk guy at the next table to pass out in front of his pork chop dinner. And luckily, the guy's head hit the table without messing up the food. And so my dad then lifted up the plate and shared it with my mom. And she thought this was very thrifty. And they proceeded to get shit-faced on all the free drinks that she had sent to her from admirers across the room. And they danced and they sent them off on their adventure together. My folks scraped and saved and got a little boat of their own and fished crab out at Dutch and dipped their salmon nets in places like Alatak, Uyak, and Ikalik. And you hear crab now and you think deadly as catch, but the boat I'm talking about makes the Wizard look like a princess cruise. My parents fished crab in a 38-foot boat made out of wood. That's tough. When my mom got pregnant, they thought they had a little tough guy on the way. I mean, they thought I was a boy. The heartbeat, the growth, the dozen folk tricks people do to turn a coin flip into a science, the roundness of mama's belly, whether she carries high or low, the swing of a ring on a hair, the nausea. All these things forecast a little dude. They'd even picked out a name. Hans Gustav. Hans Gustav Messerschmitt, ein richtiger deutscher Name. Tough was my mom being on the boat near her 3rd trimester. Tough was leaving her man and heading south in July to prepare for a baby in October. Tough was what happened next. She stopped off in Washington to visit her mother and to break up the long, strange commute from Kodiak to the flat clay and cornfields of her southern Indiana home. What she thought was a gas pain turned out to be, well, me. Overeager and in a hurry as I've been ever since, 9.5 weeks early and just over 3 pounds, half-baked, no bigger than a small humpy. Tough was when they took me away from her and put me in a warm, sterile little box, fed through tubes and sealed away so that my systems had a chance to fight and to grow. Tough as not being allowed to touch your newborn baby. The news spread by phone to the harbor master and then by radio from boat to boat. My dad says he was the last to know. He couldn't stop fishing, the runs were too good. And as he put it, not like you were doing much to look at anyway. And then they thought, oh shit, what do we call her? Hans Gustav no longer seemed to fit. As I cooked in my incubator, my parents hastily traded letters and lists through costly ship-to-shore calls, and they finally found a name they agreed on. Lara Lee. Every woman my age named Lara has a jewelry box at some point that played Somewhere My Love. As we're all a result of a generation's crush on Julie Christie and Dr. Zhivago. 1965. Lara. Hardly a tough guy name. At 2 years old, packaged in the useless little orange flotation vest that we call death preservers, I was deemed tough enough to go on the boat in the summer, where I played with kelp and drew pictures of tide pools and tried to stay out of the grown-ups' way. Those were easier days for everyone in some ways, more regular fishing patterns. We worked 5 days on and took the weekends off to rest, repair gear, do fun things like grill king salmon on the hibachi on deck, or comb the shore for glass balls and beach jewels. That was before the fishing grounds would open and close based on runs and returns, before we would sometimes have work weeks that stretched into 2 and 3 without a rest each day, sometimes 18 to 20 hours long for nearly a month. Or things would be open, but the fish just weren't there. And we'd make 10 sets a day just because we could, just in case they started running, straining water and burning fuel because it was easier than wondering what would happen if we didn't. Tough were the nights when I would lie in my bunk in the forecastle, listening to the water slap against the side of the hole beside my head. I would close my eyes and feel the water all around me, below me, reaching deep, deep in every direction, dark and wet and cold and moving and slapping and full of currents and creatures and unstoppable force. And I remember straining against the panic that would come, the terrible awe my tiny self felt at such a direct, unmediated sense of a very real, very near abyss. Tough was when I was 8 years old and my favorite deckhand was fired for selling weed over the radio. This is no shit. It got tougher quick when the other deckhand quit the same day and I found myself the new cork stacker on the boat. And I wore a cap and goggles to keep the jellyfish out of my eyes, and I knew with every breath I was about to make a mistake that would either kill me or lose all our fish. And the days were long and the work was frightening, but I learned to love it almost as much as I hated it. And I remember my dad beaming and pointing at me as I struggled to fling a loop of cork line above my shoulders, and he shouted to the stories of the girls who'd gone to camps, had sleepovers, and spent the summer growing tan and lean and eating popsicles by the community pool. Tough was seeing how all of the rules had changed again, and the allegiances reformed, and once again, each tight knot of friendship had no room in its loops for me. Tough was listening to their boring small talk anyway, wondering how they could care about TV shows and songs, and how none of them had the first clue how to clean a fish. Tough was when I was 15 and realized that I wasn't much of a deckhand. Around the same time, I discovered that I was big and strong, and that it didn't matter if I wasn't a boy. I could still do a man's work. And so I learned. I learned from good deckhands who were happy to teach, and I learned to tie knots and to tie them quickly and with one hand and with different sizes of line. And I learned how to mend gear, and learned just as quickly why early feminists of the 19th century warned, never learn how to sew. And if you do, don't let anyone know about it. Everyone else would be inside eating a hot meal and sacking out in their bunks as I put my excellent net skills to use, fixing the goddamn hole in the bag again. I learned to hustle on deck, learned how to tape my knife to the strap of my rain gear, learned how to cut the forearms off my sweatshirts to keep the rest dry. I learned how to read charts and start the skiff. I learned how to sort and pitch faster than anyone else in the fleet. I learned that as a woman, I had to be twice as good as anyone else if I was gonna have half the respect. It was tough keeping the hands of the other deckhands out of my bunk as I tried to sleep. It was tough covering my ears as they jerked off 2 feet above my head and tried to tell me all about it. It was tough being treated like a goddess on the dock, and then coming home and being just a freak again, a tall, strange fish out of water. Tough as being screamed at for a living. Tough as sleeping in your clothes and boots to save time. Tough as smelling everybody else's damp socks and sweatpants from inches away. Tough as hearing the engine start up and racing to pull the pick 3 hours after you hit the rack. Tough as waiting for a closure to end so you can go back to work again. Now, I have a hell of a work ethic. I don't even know what to do with it anymore, now that I can't burn it up killing fish. Tough as having skills that no one needs and no one knows. When my gentle husband and I first moved in together, he grew quiet and distant as we unloaded the truck with all of our boxes. And I hadn't even noticed how quickly I'd hustled or the orders that I'd barked. "Don't yell at me," he said. "I'm not a fisherman." What's tough now is living in a world where my work is determined by factors unseen, where my money is an abstraction. There was a time when red sold for $2.25 a pound. That means for a deckhand making 8%, an average 6-pound fish was $1.08 in the bank. That's $1 in your hand every time you toss a fish in the hold. That is a living I can understand. Tough is straddling 2 worlds. When I was in college, I would stare at a blank piece of paper, waiting for an essay to write itself as the clock ticked through 2 to the early hours of morning. At least I'm not on deck, I'd think to myself, knowing how tough it could be. And then months later, I'd find myself on deck again, soaking wet, shoulders burning, heaving stacks of seine into tidy little mounds that I was so proud of, and keeping the purse line taut with one hand, and at least I'm not writing a term paper, I think to myself. Tough is hearing about the boats going down. It's knowing there will be no goodbye. Tough is dreaming of your friends and lovers lost beneath the surface, knowing those last moments were cold and then warm. They always say drowning feels warm, that the panic is replaced with a dream-like euphoria as your life floats to the surface, leaving your body down below. One of the toughest guys I ever knew did everything. Every other deckhand did, but somehow always managed to coax 3 square meals a day from a little oil stove that spat black smoke into the galley and only had 2 temperatures, hot and broken. Freshly baked bread, homemade lasagna, chocolate chip cookies, steamed rice, and grilled octopus straight from the net. They took crap from the skipper without losing their cool and kept him company up topside as the rest of us slept. They brought coffee or a hot tang or gin and tonics to the boss, and yet still had time to listen to each of us on deck. They marveled at seaweed, tended our wounds, laughed at our jokes, and grew carrot tops in a jar lid and a patch of sunshine on the edge of a porthole. One of the toughest guys I ever knew was my mom. Tough is trying to tell you what it's like, watching the water day in and day out, the conversations you have, the community you feel, the creatures you see, what your body means, what it's like to be strong, strong, strong. Tough is having memories that slip every time you reach for them, slowly getting washed away with the tide. Tough is knowing I'll never go back. I know something about tough, and it's not what you think. Thank you.
Now you know what Fisher Poets is really about. It's really about, you know, laying it out there like your whole heart, your whole life, your whole world. And Laura, unbelievable. You know, you've done it again. I mean it. Last year I thought, oh my goodness, how could she ever come back with something more than she's done last year? And I think she just did it. Honest to goodness, that was really, I don't have words for it.